Hi everyone, this is Krishna Poda, co-founder and CEO of Saras Analytics, and we are here for the first edition of a Saras podcast. And I have with me Matt Bahr from Fairing. Matt, a quick introduction from you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on the podcast. I'm Matt. I'm one of the co-founders of Fairing. We are a post-purchase survey solution helping brands solve everything from attribution to personalization to conversion rate optimization.
Awesome, Matt. How did you choose the name Fairing? It used to be Enquire Labs before, and you chose Fairing after that. I had to be honest, I didn't know what it meant, so I had to research it. And when I did that, it just seemed like the most apt name for the business. So just curious around the name and how you ended up there.
Yeah, we rebranded almost 2 years ago from Enquire Labs, which arguably wasn't a horrible name. It used to be Enquire, then it was Enquire Labs, and that was really for trademark reasons. We couldn't kind of build a brand around Enquire alone. Um, and after we rebranded to Enquire Labs, everyone still called us Enquire. So we're like, hey, we're going to rebrand. We're still kind of in the Shopify ecosystem. This is probably the best time to do it. So we did a ton of kind of naming exercises internally, and one of our employees, our head of comms at the time, came up with Fairing, and yeah, it fit beautifully, and nobody in software was currently using it. It's obviously, as you know, owned by cyclists or F1 airplanes, etc. And there was this beautiful synergy with our question stream product and asking questions and reducing friction and everything that kind of goes along with a physical fairing that we were super excited to bring to our brand. Yeah, it's been fun. We arguably don't as much as we should. I think a lot of people like yourself, it sounds like, were educated on what a fairing was. So definitely more to come on that as we continue to do more brand marketing for our product.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as we go through the discussion, we'll talk more about what Fairing does and how it sort of fits into rather plays true to its name. But just wanted to touch on one thing. When these name change happens, there is a undiscussed or unsaid impact. So as you know, we support Fairing as a connector in our platform so that customers can replicate the data and build their own reporting and so on and so forth. Only the customer facing stuff says Fairing. Everything on the back end still says Enquire Labs, even till today.
Yep. And you're not our only integration partner that has told me that. So it's obviously more difficult to change some of those things on the back end, but we still get a fair amount of I've podcasts from pre-rebrand, so we're still seeing some branded search in our AdWords accounts for Enquire. Curious how long that'll go on, but it's difficult to totally rebrand and move on.
Yeah, awesome. So when you think a brand would, rather should, start thinking about adding a post-purchase survey to the customer experience?
Yeah, it really runs the gamut as far as when. We'd obviously recommend from day one. Understanding where your customer's coming from and understanding your customers is paramount to finding that next customer. And kind of whether it's learning the channels that are working or learning the why behind the buy, all of those things are going to be helpful. So if you're doing one order a day or whatever kind of that early entry fee is, or entry volume is, we're going to help solve those problems for you in a very high response rate. A lot of brands probably start to run SurveyMonkey or some legacy survey solution, and you're lucky if you're going to get a more than 10% opt-in for that, and we're able to capture 4 or 5, 6x that. So definitely day zero, we'd say, pre-launch. And as we've validated, that scales all the way up to Shopify's biggest brand currently uses us. So it definitely can help along that spectrum, and understanding who your customers are, what channels they're discovering you on, the why behind they bought, et cetera, is just something that should always be important through the entire life cycle of the business.
Typically, yes, ideally, similar to how I feel about customers, needing a fully built out data warehouse and reporting and so on and so forth. There's a natural progression to when, brands start to feel the need. So do you see a sweet spot there in your customer base where you start seeing more inbound coming in, customers asking for it?
Yeah, it's usually when a brand starts to allocate budget beyond kind of single channel go to market. So if you're using our kind of paramount, how did you hear about us question, or where did you hear about us to help understand that top of funnel, if that data never changes week to week, we're arguably not going to be super helpful. Like if it just says like 10% word of mouth, 80% meta, 10% Google maybe, if there's no variation in that data, like you're just going to be continuously looking at the same thing. But as you start to lean into other channels that are harder to measure, whether it's influencer gifting is kind of definitely an early strategy for brands, or podcasts and TV on the more as a brand starts to scale, that's when we see brands really start to lean in and want to rely on our data to help allocate those different channels, budgets, and how much they're putting into each bucket. That's really what we see. Like, is once a brand starts to say, okay, I'm spending $10,000 a month on Meta. Now it's time for me to start thinking about maybe another channel. How am I going to manage and understand this entire channel mix? Is definitely that kind of catalyst that's like, okay, I need another way. I need a third-party solution. I can't rely on last click and GA. I can't
Right.
solely rely on platform reported metrics. Like, what am I going to do to help? I can use discount codes, but that's not going to capture the whole suite of customers who are coming through a channel. So that's typically what we see as far as timing goes. And yeah, that differs for brands. Sometimes brands get to 5 million in GMV and then they start diversifying. Some brands diversify earlier. I think it really depends on the talent on the team, their experience, and how well their product performs on specific channels.
Got it. This diversification is happening on both fronts, right? One is there is sales channel diversification where customers are expanding out of Shopify into retail and Amazon, Walmart, so on and so forth. There is also a marketing channel diversification happening where beyond Google and Meta, people are starting to spend more on TikTok, and TV has become a big player in many customers, etc. How do you see the question stream or the fairing surveys that people are building? How do you see those evolving in an environment where there's diversification happening on both fronts?
Yeah, right now we're definitely still very much focused on the kind of owned channels, like the direct to consumer channels, et cetera. We work with a lot of brands who are selling into the target kind of large big box here, to help them understand kind of that crossover. Hey, I acquired a customer at Target. Now they're purchasing on my direct consumer site. What does that flow look like? How many customers are coming from this channel? A lot of brands are using kind of exclusivity on the D2C channels to drive people back. So there is a kind of pull to these owned channels. But I would say, to your point, brands are way more apt to diversify and go omni-channel a lot earlier than they were maybe 5 years ago. There was definitely a direct consumer or bust, was definitely the MO. And I think what a lot of operators found out is like a lot of the acquisitions that were happening, at least in CPG, were happening to brands that were selling an omni-channel. They were able to scale faster, get more awareness, and they didn't have to pay or kind of pay Facebook or Meta that VIG to get access to consumers. So I don't see the trend going down anytime soon. At least for us, we're definitely still focused on that owned channel versus trying to solve for maybe products purchased in these other channels. So media mixes are getting more complex, measurements getting more complex. I know we have like media mix modeling which was invented in the 60s, is now back in the zeitgeist as far as how to measure. And all of this is due to omni-channel. It's due to deprecation of third-party cookies. It's due to iOS 14 and app transparency tracking. So the world for brand operators is getting more complex, but at the same time, kind of the opportunity arguably is increasing as well.
Got it. In terms of, although from a fairing standpoint, you may not be capturing the revenue from these channels, but you're definitely capturing the intent of the customer who's perhaps bought on a Target or a Walmart and now deciding to buy on a Shopify store, right? So the question stream can still evolve to solve for attribution, and that seems to be more taking more of your mind share, Matt, these days.
Yeah, exactly. Like we have brands that sell into these big box retailers, and those big box retailers are the number one driver of new customers on their direct consumer channel as far as these how did you hear about us questions. Storefronts are also huge drivers of new customers. Honestly, surprisingly, you'd think that
Yeah.
Meta would be able to get more reach more profitably, but we have 9-figure brands that acquire the most customers via these other channels. So it's definitely very positive to see. I think everyone wants an alternative to Meta. Meta right now is probably still the best place to put the majority of your marketing budget. But as you scale, obviously, you preferably want a more diversified, predictable channel mix. God forbid CPMs increase with Meta, then you're kind of stuck holding the bag.
Got it. So if a brand, let's say, opens a retail chain and now they have one in each major city, so how would, and they also have a successful direct to consumer business, how can, let's say, they use leverage fairing to understand who their customers are, where they're coming from? Help me walk
Yeah.
through it, because so we share a few common customers. One thing that I have noticed was that there is often I look at the question stream as a collaborative activity across a bunch of different people to try and understand who are my customers, where they're coming from, so on and so
Yeah.
forth, right? So in some occasions, I've seen the CMO of a business driving that initiative. In some cases, I've looked at the Facebook channel manager who's driving a significant amount of revenue, wanting to understand their impacts. Two parts to the question. One is, how do you think about building a question stream? Who plays what role? Help me understand what are some of the best practices that you have seen brands adopt in building a fantastic question stream that helps people like me who normally click on others in the option to not want to do that, but actually select the option that can then lead to downstream benefits like with attribution or customer segmentation, lifetime value, etc.
Yeah. So the first part, as far as retail goes and measuring influx of customers there, our best recommendation, which only a handful of brands are doing now, is and if you're using Shopify point of sale, is to actually use our POS integration in Question Stream. We have a very well-known framing company that's doing that and has captured like tens of thousands of responses this year just by asking customers in person. So whether it's people walking by your store, you heard about it through a brand, and then they're converting in person, there's still an avenue for that conversation to happen. It's very much a in-person relationship building tactic, and like, oh, what drove you in today? How did you hear about us? And you just happen to be recording that with fairing. So that's definitely the recommended path for trying to understand those owned retail avenues. As far as Question Stream goes, and just to kind of level set on what is Question Stream. So Question Stream is our version of surveys. So surveys to us are this medium to capture data from consumers that hasn't changed in 100 plus years, whenever they were kind of initially invented. What Question Stream does is a different way of asking questions. So to the end consumer, it's very similar. You're selecting either a radio button, a drop down, adding text into an other kind of input fields. But on the back end, what we've done with Question Stream is we've made this way in which the questions, or the order in which the questions are shown, extremely dynamic. So Krishna, you might get a different question or questions than I, based on a product that you purchased. And the really unique part for our customers is they now don't have to manage all of these different survey permutations. There's only one question stream. The targeting is on the question level. I mean, it allows for this really simple mental model for the marketer to be able to, like, I want to capture this data from this customer. So maybe that first customer gets asked to all customers, but the second one gets only asked to a subset. So that's a little bit about Question Stream from an infrastructure and how it works perspective. But from a utility, like how do you get maximize utility? We group everything today into 4 core categories. First one's attribution and measurement. How did you hear about us? When did you hear about us? What led you to the site today? Helping understand that top of funnel, or maybe lower a funnel if you're a returning customer. Those questions are highly valuable. The next one is personalization. We like to think of this as like anything that you could push to your ESP, to Klaviyo or whatever ESP you're using, to then send a more personalized email. The third category is conversion rate optimization. This is pretty much only a commerce example, but how was your shopping experience type questions. If you're doing enough volume, it's a very, or doing low volume too, but it's a very easy way to be like, oh, my add to cart button doesn't work on Firefox. Like, I don't know who's using Firefox, but something you probably want to solve for, because there's other people probably hitting that same pain point. And then the last one is simply, we call it consumer insights. It's demographic, psychographic type responses, age, gender, etc. All of this data can be joined and pivoted with your commerce data, with your transaction level data. And that's obviously what our integration does with your team, but that's where you can really start to compound the value of this, because just looking at ones and zeros all day, it's kind of sometimes hard to build that narrative of the why, like why is this happening? And you start to layer in this other consumer kind of input, whether it is the channel that the customer said they heard about you, maybe their age, maybe how they would classify themselves, maybe they're a hobbyist. And then you're able to tell this beautiful narrative that maybe have been lacking if you're just looking at, hey, sales went up on this channel, and you're kind of like, I don't know why, we had good creative and it worked, is sometimes where brands get caught up. So that's the long and short of the process. As far as writing good questions, like we have a question bank in our product. We have 2 methodologist advisors. I think we're going to talk a little bit about generative AI later on, but we've definitely been hesitant to let these products write questions for our brands without kind of the context needed that goes into them. Because if the question is worded incorrectly, you might get kind of a false positive or false negative with the output of that based on how it's structured. So there's definitely a lot of nuance. Like a methodologist is a survey writing expert, and it's a role for a reason, because it's actually a pretty difficult task.
Is that like an undergraduate degree for that sort of work, or is this more of an acquired skill?
Yeah, there's no undergraduate degree. It's definitely more of like a post, whether it's graduate or PhD. Like most methodologists, I would say, fall into one of those 2 categories. And it's mainly because, like in your PhD, you're answering questions. Like you're writing your thesis, you're trying to build a case typically. And this process of discovering something usually involves some form of methodology. We see a lot of methodologists come from that specific background.
Interesting. Okay. So, is it typical for a brand that's using Fairing to uh, build the question stream using the question bank and then just internal resources, or is it always the case that the methodologist hopping on a call, helping them think through this and get
Yeah,
the stream?
it's not super often that our methodologists are jumping on calls. It's pretty much on a one. I'd say about half of our customers are using our question bank. The others kind of already have the questions that they want to ask, and whether that's they've done the research before, or maybe they're migrating from a different solution and they're just trying to copy it over is obviously a use case or example there. But it really is 50-50. I think the question bank is it's more used for, I didn't realize I can ask these types of questions and solve these problems. And then it doubles as like, okay, this is now the correct way to write the questions to solve those problems. So it definitely differs. We only have 24 questions in our question bank today, and that's pretty purposeful. I don't think a list of 500 questions you can ask is going to be helpful. There's obviously a paradox of choice, and there's probably a way to winnow that list down to 100 questions maybe to get a very similar output. But there's a whole science behind how and when to ask these questions, and that's kind of like a continuous R&D for us of like how do we ask better questions, and like every day in the future.
Matt, that's an interesting conundrum, right? You're saying that there are 24 questions in the question bank, but you have access to all the questions that people want to ask of a customer making a purchase, right? So, as a product owner, how do you make that trade off between how big should I make this question bank versus how do I keep it lean and let the people who are using Fairing use their creativity to build it out?
Yeah, we start with our use cases. We start with the problems our customers are trying to solve, and then work with our methodologists to then add questions to that bank. So I think it's more of argue it's like a paradox of choice. If we were to list 500, it would actually possibly make it harder for our customers to know which maybe 5 or 10 they want in their question stream. So more options arguably isn't always better, at least has been our view. But most of our customers come to us for very like pinpoint problems. Like usually it's like, I just launched on a podcast. We just launched a $100,000 a month podcast advertising campaign, and I'm trying to improve measurement on that channel. So if that's what they're coming for us during their journey as a Fairing customer, we want to tell them other questions and how to improve the value they're getting out of Fairing. But from day one, they're just trying to ask probably, where did you hear about us? And they want to get that live as quick as humanly possible to start building that baseline. And we don't want to create an environment where that we've almost complicated the problem they're trying to solve initially.
Interesting. Interesting. So that's an interesting point that you highlight is when some of these big events are happening, then it suddenly might dawn on the podcast owner or the marketer to say, okay, now we are pumping a lot of money into this. I better be prepared in terms of understanding the impact that this is creating, right? But do you also see, is that common, or is it more common to have an organization level thinking where it says, hey, we are pumping a lot of money into advertising, whether there is a significant event happening at a particular point in time or not, we as a culture, organization culture, want to track and want to ensure that we understand where our customers are coming from. Between these two, where do you see more brands leaning these days versus,
It's
let's
probably,
say, a year or two
yeah,
back?
it's probably split 50-50. There's definitely more of an urgency to get a question stream live if someone is like coming in very channel specific because
Mhm.
it's such a specific problem they're trying to solve. And then there's other brands who are just like, I know this is a problem. I talk to my peers in the industry and they solve measurement with surveys. Like, I need a survey, which is kind of the other kind of vector that people are pointed at us towards. Yeah, it really runs the two. So we're either
Okay.
sometimes working with like a head of audio at a $50 million GMV brand who's managing all the audio partnerships, or sometimes we're working with a digital product leader who's just responsible for the integration and setting up initial questions. And those questions are kind of getting created usually from the top down from a measurement perspective. So it really depends on the size of the business, the entry point. But if a brand is advertising on some of these harder to measure channels, they're usually involved in all these conversations because they're the most excited to get us live because we're going to help them do a better job or at least measure their performance a lot better.
Do you see typically that people continue on after that and expand the scope of the questions to get a better understanding of the customers? Is that a natural progression?
Yeah, that is the progression. I'd say at this point, it's very rare that someone just starts with one question. Um, it's usually starting with 3 to 5, even if it's a very large brand who might have only been asking one question before via email or some other solution. When we jump on demos, we definitely harp on attribution and measurement, but the other use cases can't be ignored. And the one thing about post-purchase surveys is like we live in moment. So we live on thank you, order confirmation pages, order tracking pages, etc. And once a consumer sees that page and then leaves, it's very difficult to get them to answer a survey
Yeah,
question in the future. We're talking like 30% open rate on an email, 2% click. Like, you can kind of do that calculation yourself. But it is important, at least we harp, to get questions, more than one question live, just because it is difficult to go back in time. Getting this data today is going to be more valuable than getting it tomorrow. So that's really how you set yourself up for success.
got it. Yeah, that's another one that I never thought of. If you don't have a question stream, you don't have the data. So
Exactly.
it's only a point in time forward that
Yeah.
customers have understanding. So
And
we spoke about.
I was
Go
just going to
ahead.
say to your point you said before we started talking, like these are new data sources. It's very often data that brands might not have any other insight into. Maybe with measurement, you're looking at discount codes or landing pages for some of these for influencers. So you have something. If you were to ask a question like, how would you describe yourself? Hobbyist, professional, educator, let's say, that is a totally new data point. So what you can do with that, whether it's from personalizing outbound messaging or pumping it into your products and now pivoting all of your other metrics on that, the earlier you have that data, the better. You're going to be able to tell that story and understand really what's going on from day zero or day one versus, hey, day 30. So, yeah,
Exactly.
couldn't harp on that more.
And how, I guess, what are the fill rates that you see for these question streams? Because if 100 people are converting, I see that as a gold mine when I think about attribution and understanding what channels our customers are coming from. So just curious as to what the conversion ratios are that you're seeing for people who make a purchase and the ones who fill out the surveys across the board. And is that
Yeah,
increasing or
it runs a pretty, like, there's a fairly large standard deviation across all our customers. I think there's some aspect of how, like, the legacy aspect of a brand versus not, but some brands have 55-60% completion rates on the higher end. Some have 25 to 30. Our average is, I think, right at 40% right now, which is great compared to 3 to 6, whatever the kind of rolling range if we were to think about a legacy survey product, sending surveys via email. So it's extremely high. And it's at a point where we're able to extrapolate that data with a pretty low margin of error. So that's the other point of it. If it was like 2%, and then you were relying on that data set to then extrapolate to the other 98, like probably a fairly large margin of error, especially with attribution related questions. But when you're upwards of 30, 40, 50, kind of, which is the gold standard, that margin of error drops pretty significantly. So that's why our goal is to position ourselves as a data source, not a survey tool. Like if you want to go use a survey tool, go use a SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics or a product that's been around for forever that has 50 methodologists on staff. But if you're looking to kind of make decisions in real time and think of fairing as more of like a page view or a pixel firing than a PDF, which is the other output on the other side, that's really where you want to think about post-purchase surveys in a tool like fairing.
You talk about attribution and what you're doing there, because one aspect of it is getting the UTM parameters, storing them, and then putting together an attribution model. There are aspects of coupon codes and influencers, affiliate-driven things that add a lot more complexity, right? Just in terms of managing the coupon codes, managing the mappings between the coupon codes and the affiliates. Maybe I have a post-purchase survey which says celebrity X, Y, and Z is who I heard from, but how do you then tag that back to, okay, which podcast or which event, so on and so forth, right? So I think you guys are doing something interesting there, but would love to hear from you on what it is, how you are seeing, that part of the product evolving.
Yeah. So today, whenever we capture a survey response, like we need an order ID today. So it's a dependency within our platform. We get asked all the time to remove that and just allow someone to ask a question into the ether with an anonymous ID. Today, we need an order ID. And the reason being is we want to be able to compare that survey data to the transaction level data, what people bought, how much they spent, how often they come back, et cetera. So it's a very important.
Sorry to interrupt, Matt. Quick question. So how does the order ID get passed? Is it just a page variable that from GTM gets pushed onto
So two ways. So if you're, we'll start with the easy way, which is Shopify. As your thank you page is loading, we get the order ID from the page. We then make an API call to Shopify, grab the relevant information about the order, and then that goes into essentially a function on our platform that says, hey, ask this question right now. And then we store the order information at the same time. So if you have a question that's set up to only ask customers who purchased a specific product, that's the loop we're making. We're like, did this customer purchase this product in this order? If yes, show this question. That's how it works with Shopify. It's, as you know, like extremely turnkey. If you're non-Shopify or non-commerce, we have an SDK where you essentially have to pass us this information. It's very similar to wiring up like a Meta Pixel, albeit those might be going away soon, but where you used to use some kind of variable and you're adding an order ID that way, that's how you're doing it if you're not on Shopify. We do get it both ways. And we're arguably trying to reduce how much we need to still kind of serve all customers, but that's the path or the loop of data that's happening as we're loading questions.
Understood. So you're getting the order ID as a part of the survey, and then you're marrying that data with the transaction data, and then that helps you identify what questions were answered by a customer and how many orders later on they placed during their life
Exactly.
cycle. To get some
we just launched our LTV add-on on Monday of this week. That's exactly how we're doing it. Yeah, so we are. Thank you. Yeah, we're grabbing a customer ID and then we're comparing it to the response, and then we're able to show that customer over time in different cohorts. So if you were curious customers that heard about your brand in November, let's say Q4 from TikTok, like, are those customers good customers or are they bad customers? So that's what we launched on Monday. And it's just because we have the customer ID, like we have the information that allows us to join this to future transaction data. But yeah, on your point around attribution and discount codes, like measurement today is all about triangulation. I think everyone's kind of agreed on that. If we think about how to measure efficacy or performance of specific ad channels, there's two approaches. You have a bottoms-up approach and you have a top-down approach. A couple of years ago, your bottoms-up approach was multi-touch. That was like the way, maybe last click if you were a little bit more legacy. has always been a top-down approach. We're very much bottoms-up as well. We're at getting individual per transaction attribution data. Other bottoms-up approaches are arguably discount codes and landing pages. But what we've launched recently is just comparing the survey response data to those other to discount codes and UTM parameters. That's kind of the triangulation of like, okay, I was just spending $100,000 a month on podcasts. I was just relying on discount codes. Now with Infaring, you could see, okay, customers that say podcast, how many of them use the code? And it really differs across brand. We have brands that only are getting about 50% code penetration for their podcast response. So that's like hugely important because for a brand that maybe didn't think podcast was working, they're about to go turn it off. Their return might actually be double than what they were expecting. So it's all about triangulation. There's obviously some level of art just baked around science, let's call it, when it comes to how you triangulate and how you want to lead on specific channels. But we're fortunate that we're bottoms up. And we're also very kind of agnostic to the channel and how it's performing. We're not grading our own homework in any fashion. Meta is very much third party. We like to stay out. Hey, talk to your customers and kind of get the information directly from the source.
Awesome. Matt, one follow-up question to your comment earlier around the survey completion rate. So let's say a brand has a 50-60% survey completion rate, and we are able to take those order IDs and then tie that to Shopify or the e-commerce platform and get the attribution. Are you then forecasting out or projecting out what the 100% outlook might look like, or are customers doing something additionally on top of what Fairing is doing, and then trying to get a picture? What are your thoughts there?
We extrapolate. We have extrapolation functionality today that is basic. It's very simple. Let's say all we're taking is the survey completion rate and dividing that into the specific response metrics. So it's very simple today. It's used a ton. It's like our most clicked part of our product. And there's like a massive opportunity for us to do that in a more intelligent way that we're working on now. That I think the exciting thing for us is like a brand might not need to ask all customers, how did you hear about us? Because we can predict with a very, very high confidence interval what they're going to click when they're asked that question. So maybe we can ask them a different question. So that's what we're working on now in the sense of how do we add some probability into our question stream functionality where maybe you and I are getting different questions, not based on some hard-coded rules, but based on, Matt, like we have these 5 UTM parameters for Matt. We've seen him on all these other brands. We can predict he heard about you through Instagram. We could say that with a pretty high confidence interval. Let's ask him maybe this other question first, or maybe let's reword the how did you hear about us to be like, hey, did you discover us on Instagram? As a way to kind of further validate that information. So that's where we're trying to go because that gap, like there's surveying, there's all these types of biases. There's selection bias, which we don't have a huge issue with given we're asking all customers. We're not kind of only asking a portion of them. But how do we kind of help solve these problems, get higher completion rates, and make that extrapolation even more important to the point of, hey, maybe a brand doesn't need other types of measurement solutions because ours becomes so accurate and yet so simple at the same time.
Wow, that's so exciting. How far have you guys already launched it, or is it in the works to be launched at some point?
We're probably like 12 months away from like actually doing something of this, but we're working on it today.
Yeah, I just love the idea that if I as a consumer, I'm visiting 5 brands and Fairing is running on all of those sites, then you tend to also, I guess, predict where I might have heard about the 6th brand, right? So that's very exciting. And now you're saying you'll probably use that intelligence to gather some more quantitative data about the customer and build a much richer picture about the customer themselves. Interesting.
Yeah, I think the more exciting thing, if we think about who we're serving, so we're serving brands and merchants today, and setting up a question and managing a question is arguably like it takes time. If you we have an autocomplete feature that's used a ton for influencer measurement, and like adding another influencer to that list takes time. So where we want to get to is a brand doesn't need to set up their how did you hear about us, let's say. They just need to turn on an attribution question, and we will do that all for them.
Yes.
So we will pre-populate the list of podcasts they're on via what we already know. So that's very much where we want to go. So the management of the how did you hear about us gets totally pushed away, and brands just activate your question, and we handle everything with a very high level of confidence, more so than our brands have today with kind of this hard-coded version, which is kind of where the limits are right now.
Got it. Yeah, especially when people realize a few days later that I should have updated the survey question
Yeah.
because it
Or what we
sometimes
see
it
now is like one team member updates it and doesn't tell the other, and then there's multiple options because they didn't check it. Like there's a lot of management going on as the
right.
variance of channels changes. Hey, I want a baseline on TV. We're about to start advertising on TV. Like these are all things that we could do automatically without having someone have to go in and manage it.
Interesting. So it looks like our fairing connector will undergo some changes with all the new development on your end,
Yeah.
most likely.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we've done
A
some
lot of
interesting
changes.
work on fairing data, where customers have asked us to use the fairing question and the attribution data from fairing, take the attribution data from GFO, take the
Yep.
attribution data from NotBeam, and then also layer in on top of that, attribution from coupon codes, and build this comparative model so that they can then pick and choose either what they want to believe, or get like maybe an averaged out picture about what different platforms are saying, etc. So we did a couple of engagement there which were interesting. I think we may have spoken to you about that, or Ashraf must have.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. That's the way to do it. That's the smartest brands today are using some form of combining multiple different measurement solutions to get to an output. And we're not going to like, our goal is to get really good at one thing. We don't have, at least in our peer view of like, let's ingest all these other data sources. But yeah, that's where us partnering with solutions like yours makes a ton of sense. And we just can focus on getting you better data, more structured data, more normalized data, so that you can do all of those cost comparisons or just general comparisons across platforms.
Absolutely. And are you thinking about Fairing as a brand focused product or any digital commerce product? Let's say, I mean, I run a SaaS business and I'm interested in knowing where people are coming from. There may be other like insurance products, there are healthcare products that people sell online where I see Fairing being relevant. Are those areas that you're exploring also, or is that still
Yeah.
undecided?
Yeah. Very, very much so. Yeah, no, very much so. That's where we're going. I think what we've made from a product direction decision is like we could get really good at one thing, which is helping companies better understand their top of funnel by asking customers directly. And that problem is not a problem that is specific to Shopify merchants or
Right.
commerce merchants in general. To your point, it's a problem that B2B SaaS has, fintech, consumer. Hey, you download an app. Where did you hear about this app? Directionally, that's 100% where we're going. But a lot of it is us becoming more scientific in our methodology so that brands can really start to trust and lean on our solution as a valid source of truth in how they're allocating spends. Yeah, these problems, it's funny. I've been in e-commerce since 2010 or so, and like measurement is difficult in commerce. Like it's actually way harder in like mobile. Like the chain of events that happens and the kind of reliability on some of these large platforms in mobile, like no one knows what's going on. So there's a massive opportunity in these other channels as well. But for us, it just makes sense for us to get it right in one before we really push to move on to another.
Agreed. Agreed 100%. Any closing thoughts, Matt? I think we're coming up on time. So just curious for brand owners who are thinking about post purchase surveys, or brand owners who are thinking about understanding attribution of their spends. Is there any advice, thoughts that you wanted to share?
Yeah, like the general advice is what we started with is just like you should, whether it's Fairing or any other tool, you should be talking to your customers and think of that as like a valid ongoing data point and not something that's ignored. A lot of brands think about doing quarterly surveys that have low opt-in rates, and it's almost like this process that they run. And in moment questions are going to capture way more data, especially when you already know the customer. So getting started and adding a survey from day one is going to elicit way more value and hopefully build like better mental models internally for your whole team, because you have this like ongoing stream of insights coming from that end consumer that you didn't have before. That's the one thing that I'll always harp on is like start today, and don't think of it as like a PDF that's going to get circulated once a quarter. Like think of it as a data stream analogous to your Google Analytics. Like you're not going to turn Google Analytics off for a month just to do it. And that's very similar to how we view the data that we're capturing.
Just last question: do you think about the funding needed to get someone like a Fairing on the website as a small fraction of an allocated marketing spend, or is that like an additional spend that the marketing team has to account for? How do you think about it? Is it like
Yeah,
saying, hey, give me a 0.05% of your marketing spend, I'll make sure that the rest of it performs better?
exactly. And that's like our goal, surveying and insights, like these teams, like in insights, if we look at Fortune 1000 companies, like research teams have like 1/10 the budget of marketing teams. So it's advantageous to us. Like we don't want to just be a research tool. We want to be a marketing tool that kind of is allocated and goes into that stack. And if you think about distribution and media spend, like a 1% change in maybe investing into podcasts, it's performing like you want to always be looking for that alpha on a per channel basis, and finding where that next customer is going to be cheapest. And that's where we're going to help. Because if you're misaligned there, then you're leaving like that might be your EBITDA on the line right there, like a misalignment of channels based on
Yeah.
performance. Definitely part of that marketing budget more so than anything else.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. I would love to double click on some of the points, but hopefully when we catch up next time, I might pick your brain on some of the things that you said today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. This was a ton of fun, and yeah, always great to catch up.
Absolutely. Thank you. Ready? I can, it's still recording, right? Okay.